Halo.
Rame banget. Buset, I see seven of millions people.
Apa kabar? Baik.
Sehat nih.
Syukurlah.
Should we speak in English or just in Indonesia?
Indonesia is okay.
Sebelum mulai Indonesia dulu. Karena Jeffrey minta katanya mau di apa?
Iya.
Dari sananya minta
Bahasa Inggris maaf.
ya terus kita buat begitu ya.
Gak apa ya?
Oh, karena banyak yang sih. Udah berapa juta orang? 500.000 orang. Betapa banyak yang tertarik mau terbit di Scopus, tapi sedikit yang mau hadir nih.
Lagi paruh ya, iya juga.
Ini kan soalnya week 14.
Oh iya, minggu terakhir ya. Oh.
Jadi ya, minggu terakhir bener ya Mbak? Nah, jadi pada kayak Pak Iwan tadi salam buat kamu. Ketemu di tempat pipis. Pak Iwan bilang, wah Jeffrey itu saya kenal baik.
Iya, dulu pembimbing magang saya Pak Indi.
Oh, pembimbing magang.
Iya.
Ya, terus tadi bilang, aduh, tapi gua ngajar jam 2 ya gimana? Ya salam aja buat Jeffrey ya.
Iya, lagi padat ya kalau minggu terakhir nih.
Pak Okta tadi karena barengan juga lagi sama-sama di luar kan. Saya bilang, aduh, pengen datang. Karena Scopusnya banyak lagi kan. Kan? Terus, aduh, tapi bimbingan itu dia skripsi ya. Udah kumpul masih tahu udah kumpul, jadi nggak mungkin dibaring. Jadi yang lain-lain siapa nih? Roni nanti mau datang Pak Roni.
Oh Pak Roni.
Pak Roni mau datang.
Siap.
Harganya mana ini?
Harga lagi
di Bandung sekarang
Oh pergi dong.
di bawah dia tuh yang itu
Oh ini masih di sini. Paling
lambat namanya.
sama tamu ya. Ada Mbak Kiki segala semua. Oh. Ya nanti soalnya dari dosen multimedia Nusantara Politeknik juga pada mau datang.
Oh.
Kita datang online ya, tapi tadi Mbak Cici online. Mbak Cici itu HRD ya.
Oh,
Desi Lengke.
Masih Mbak Cici di sini.
Masih, tapi dia sekarang udah di wakil direktur MNP.
Oh.
Politekniknya. Yang belum sebesar Hong Kong.
Oh.
Ini.
Waduh.
Jelas beda. Beda jenis. Ya, Hong Kong kan dari tahun berapa tuh? 50 ya?
20-an.
Oh,
iya.
Belum banget.
Iya, cuma baru jadi universitasnya baru kayak berapa? 20 tahun. 20 tahun.
Oh, sebelumnya apa dong?
Politeknik.
Oh, Politeknik aja
Ini
ya?
Politeknik aja. Sekarang
Oh, bukan university.
Iya.
Oh, kalau di sana boleh ya konsep Politeknik, tapi university.
Harusnya nggak boleh, tapi akhirnya karena fakultas sudah banyak, jadi
Karena fakultas ya
penambahan fakultas, jadi di upgrade ke jadi university.
Tanpa menanggalkan yang
Politekniknya, karena jadi identitinya mereka gitu. Jadi emang utama tetap STEM, tapi sekarang humanities bisnisnya juga growing. Gitu.
Ya, jadi memang basicnya dia STEM ya Politekniknya.
Engineering-nya sama
Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics.
Tapi sekarang jadi STEAM kan, jadi ada art-nya.
From STEM to STEM.
Karena sekarang yang growing-nya malah yang hotel and tourism, school of design, humanities.
Itu ya bisa.
Gitu.
Nanti dari STEM jadi STEAM jadi Hong Kong Dimsum. Kan terkenal tuh Mbak, tahu nggak Hong Kong Dimsum Mbak? Saya pernah dengar nggak Hong Kong Dimsum? Itu terkenal kalau di Hong Kong dimsumnya dicari
dumplings dan teman-teman.
Iya dan teman-teman. Jadi tahun 20 tuh artinya udah kayak umur ITB di sini ya.
Dari institut dulu terus jadi politeknik, terus sekarang jadi universitas.
Tradisinya kurang. Kan kalau kita ngomong Asia aja, kan belum terlalu banyak yang dari tahun 1800, 1900 kan nggak terlalu banyak.
Iya.
Lembaga pendidikan, apalagi yang udah langsung universitas. Kan tradisi universitas itu kan yang apa? Mesir sama Maroko yang pertama, terus habis itu Italia yang kayak Bologna, Salamanca, kan yang seven universities, the first seven universities in Europe, 1300-an berdirinya. Baru terus pindah ke beberapa negara kayak Jerman dan sebagainya, baru Amerika kan karena baru berdiri juga kan, Amerika 1800-an tuh Harvard tertua kan katanya. Nah ini 1920. Mungkin bisa disebut itu tertua di Hong Kong kan?
Kayaknya ada yang lebih tua lagi deh.
Ada ya?
Iya, tapi di Hong Kong juga kampusnya nggak banyak. Kayak yang maksudnya buat public university cuma 8 termasuk poli.
Cuma 8 termasuk poli.
Iya, karena aku juga kecil kan
Iya, iya.
sebenarnya. Iya,
Iya.
kayaknya
Itu kerekam dong kita ngobrol. Ini ada suaranya tuh, tuh.
oh iya.
Udah kerekam tapi belum recording kan?
Sudah les praktis Pak. Iya.
Oh itu udah recording kita. Oh jadi kita didengerin nih ngobrolnya nih. Ya, jam 14.04. Nah, kita lihat. Manggil dulu bentar, manggil dulu gitu.
Santai aja.
Jadi ini ceritanya lagi liburan ya. Pulang
Iya.
kampung.
Kebetulan juga semester kita udah kelar Pak, dari bulan lalu.
Mau udah duluan ya.
Iya, kita cuma 13 minggu itu pun itu masih puas UTS.
Oh 13 minggu udah. Koreksian udah masuk.
Syukurlah. Syukurlah.
Tapi sebanyak ini nggak kelas 38 orang.
Tergantung kelasnya, kalau master dia kayak 100-an orang.
Nah,
Kalau undergrad 60-an.
60-an tapi beberapa kelas atau
Satu kelas 3 jadi
oh,
lancar
jadi
hall.
kelas besar kayak
Jadi
ini
benar-
2 kali ini ya.
Jadi lancar hall gitu. Memang besar. Dia menghemat. Hemat tenaga.
Iya, ya, makasih.
Gitu.
Nah, tapi sekali koreksi ya 60 itu dong yang.
Iya, karena kita di kampus tuh TA nggak boleh koreksi. Profesor
Sih.
makanya cuma kalau misalkan dapat kelas besar kayak 80 orang itu biasanya teaching load dinaikin jadi bisa 3 kredit jadi pasangan kredit dan kita kan di sana mengajarnya 1 tahun cuma 3 kelas sebenarnya kredit
1 tahun.
1 tahun
Bukan 1 semester.
jadi kayak biasa fall ngajar 1 kelas spring ngajar 2 kelas terus itu juga ada summer cuma summer 7 minggu cuma per minggu dia pertemuannya 2 kali.
Oh, karena ada itu ya fall, spring, summer. Nah, selama winter enggak ya?
Enggak.
Jadi winter nggak ada
Winternya
aktivitas.
Hitungannya soalnya agak padat sih Pak, soalnya kayak fallnya kan dari September sampai Desember, terus springnya dari Januari sampai April, terus
Oh.
summernya dari akhir Mei sampai awal Juli.
Oh, jadi agak nanggung dikit.
Iya, agak
ya?
ganggu. Jadi sebenarnya agak semi-semi winter juga ya kelas
Iya, iya,
springnya.
iya. Kayaknya agak sedikit. Oh,
Iya.
iya, iya. Sini tadi dikirimin nama Hesma
Iya, mungkin kayaknya sama gitu.
untuk ininya apa perkenalan. Sama udah dikirimin ininya juga nih. Oh, 86 page yang
Oh, iya.
akan dipresentasikan.
Saya akan coba sesingkat
You have
mungkin.
all the time in the world, tenang aja. Tapi saya itu jam 3:04 izin pamit duluan.
Oh, siap-siap.
Ada Prof. Bar dari Leiden University
Gitu.
mau Zoom,
Oh, oke.
mau rencana pendirian AI Center, AI and Society Research Center.
Oh, di sini di Betawi. Oh, oke.
Maka beliau termasuk yang kayak ngasih insight sharingnya gimana sih kalau setup riset. Karena saya di posisi koordinator riset di kom, mesti bisa jadi teman-teman. Kalau Mas Yeri yang LPPM-nya dua tapi Head of Research Center kan LPPM punya 3 Head of Research Center, Head of Community Outreach, sama Head of Innovation Center.
Oke.
Nah, direkturnya Pak Winarno yang dulu sama kayak
masih ya?
masih
Oh,
Pak PM Winarno. Nah, Mas Yeri yang Head of Research Center-nya. Mas Yeri udah, ayo, udah gitu.
AI ya lagi berkembang.
Ya, AI and Society, satu lagi rencananya Sustainability Studies. Sustainability Studies Research Center, jadi mau ada 2. Nah, cuman nggak tahu apakah, kan di sini nggak kenal spring, fall, winter ya.
Iya.
Jadi apakah awal semester depan atau akhir semester ini tapi yang bulan Juni apa semacam soft launchingnya. Agak mempercepat soal itu. Nanti aku yang akan cari biografinya. Ini kita cek dulu ya. Journal of Communication udah masuk belum? Nah, udah masuk kan Journal of Communication kan?
Halo nih.
Nah, itu baru nih.
Apa kabar Pak?
Pak Prof. Gantian pas sekarang.
Pak Asisten Profesor, Pak Asprof.
Kan panggilnya Prof juga.
Iya, Prof juga. Kalau semua di sana Prof ya?
Iya banyak Prof.
Iya, semua dosen dipanggil Prof.
Iya,
Kayak di Prancis, di mana.
semua dipanggil Prof.
Iya. Iya, panggilan guru.
Dan kayak Pak Guru, ya kayak Pak Guru
Iya,
gitu.
tapi berat banget.
Iya.
Tapi kalau profesor yang sudah ini ada jabatannya panggilannya apa yang khusus?
Kita profesor.
Tetap dipanggil.
Iya
Cuman
banyak.
kan
Bebannya berat banget.
tracknya beda ya.
Iya.
Itu kan jam 2 mulainya.
Nah itu dia, makanya ini kita lagi, kan kita baru 7 juta orang, jadi belum nambah sejuta lagi bro.
Ada tamu istimewa dari Hong Kong ya.
Itu yang nanti kita joknya itu. Nanti kita akan buat jok-jok awal gitu ya. Mudah-mudahan bisa mencarikan suasana dari
Berapa
tradisi.
lama Jeffrey?
Cuma 4 hari Pak. Iya, minggu udah pulang.
Waduh, minggu udah pulang.
Ini benar-benar perjalanan dinas atau enggak?
Perjalanan dinas.
Benar-benar dinas ya,
Iya.
tapi sekaligus pulang.
Sekaligus pulang.
Iya. Kan ke arah sana kota bumi ya.
Iya, kan saya.
Kan Helga kemarin cerita tuh.
Kota Bumi.
Kota bumi ini di Tangerang sih.
Tangerang. Iya.
Tangerang. Kalau Helga kan arah bandara ya.
Iya, dia pasar baru.
Yang pasar baru yang di arah gede itu belok kiri.
Iya,
kan?
iya.
Itulah.
Masih lurus lagi.
Oh, masih lurus lagi.
Masih lurus lagi.
Pak Profesor pulang kampung.
Andre nggak undang nih, Pak Andre.
Ah,
Ini lagi
sudah dibanding.
Iya.
Wah berat kalau kita cuma berdua yang menghasilkan paper nanti di Scopus.
Misalnya per kategori ini kan
Udah ada yang di sini tapi
Iya, dari situ ya.
per kategori gitu aja kali ya. Kalau ini kan ini semuanya nih. Kalau dibuat misalnya yang kelihatannya pemerintah memberikan insentif itu yang ngomong apa?
Nah, itu karena
udah paham. Ntar kita.
Pamba masih ingat kan?
Masih.
Pamba.
Jadi kalau saya ke Hong Kong nemuin kamu langsung ke universitas aja ya.
Oh iya.
Apa universitas
Saya Hongkong Politeknik.
Angkung Politeknik.
Iya.
Pokoknya cari Prof. Jeffrey langsung tahu semua ya.
Waduh.
Hongkong kan kecil.
Iya, emang kecil.
Walaupun jumlah penduduk berapa 12 juta orang. Something ya.
Kayaknya 8 sampai 10 ya.
Ya, Jakarta juga.
Nggak jauh dikit dari Jakarta.
Iya.
Jakarta sebelum pindah ibu kota. Tapi pindah ibu kota udah makin turun kan. Nah, Hongkong ini nih, tapi ini recording ngomong dengan China dengan Inggris, tapi di recording jadi nggak usah lah. Daripada nggak bisa balik,
Iya.
iya kan? Nanti nggak bisa balik, dicegat di imigrasi. Kalau kita omongin itu di imigrasi masalah nanti.
No security law.
Nah itu dia.
Nanti yang per kategori nanti.
Siapa, Ambang?
Yang lainnya dihapus. Paling begitu.
Ambang. Nah, mungkin tadinya
Per kategori kan kurang ini hijau nanti ya kan.
Saya
kamu bisa
belum tembus,
Ini bisa di CMS ya.
masih ngutang sama negara.
Waduh.
Saya
Kalau
kan nggak bang.
bro recording loh.
Oh, apa-apa ya.
Oh.
Sipil loh, supaya ada kasus ya kan.
DPL-nya
Nah, ini Inggris or Indonesia nih katanya harus Inggris. Katanya harus Inggris.
Nanti habis yang diminta kalau udah.
Iya, di kan saya lulus S3 kemarin dapat IPA untuk paper internasional, tapi belum ada ya.
Udah mau pulang.
Belum ngirim juga sih.
Ya makanya belum
Iya. Saya hanya apa paper ini aja yang buat syarat lulus saja. Tapi yang itu internasional gitu.
Banyak yang di Zoom berarti ya, Pak?
Ya, ini Bu Helga udah kena yang public health ya.
Oh iya.
Ya, public health kan. Iya, bagian dari rezim Scopus. Welcome to the regime.
Tapi kan dia sudah berhasil menjinakkan ya.
Nah, udah berapa? 8 atau 9?
Menjinakkan.
1, 2, 3.
Ini Scopus masih liar ya.
Iya.
Sulit dijinakkan.
Waduh.
Oh, itu yang saya kirim kemarin lewat Bu Helga.
Oh,
Apa namanya, Tor ya?
kreatornya.
Oh, itu dihasilkan ChatGPT itu bagus kan?
Oke.
Cuma tinggal bagiannya ada pajaknya gitu ya, saya masukin. Itu ChatGPT nggak tahu.
Oh gitu.
Jadi yang depan-depan kan bagus tuh rapi tuh.
Iya.
ChatGPT gitu. Oh, pandang nggak usah translasi. Ya kan bukan untuk di-review. Ya,
Iya.
nggak apa-apa.
Masih komprehensif sekali.
Mintanya banyak amat sampai 9 butir.
Ya makanya bilangnya enggak gimana ya kayak 2 jam.
Oh, sampai 9 ini. Banyak. Dalam 2 jam minta 9.
Komprehensif.
Iya, kata saya bilang ini ada semester ya.
Ya kan tinggal masukin promnya yang bagus aja kan.
Oh, iya.
Saya minta dibuatkan tor untuk seminar tentang itu topik yang itu kan. Oke, yang cuma tinggal nggak ada Pak Jeffrey-nya, mungkin di jurnal mana itu belum ada, itu yang kita tahu.
Padahal saya komprehensif.
Hanya nggak ada sampai 1 menit udah keluar, gimana kita nggak pusing loh ChatGPT ini.
Termasuk ini
Nggak tahu.
teknik menggunakan ChatGPT.
Tapi kita lagi bikin master in AI humanities.
Ada
Lagi
ya?
bikin
Ada ya?
Dan sekarang semuanya satu harus ikut introduction to AI.
Oh, ada mata kuliahnya.
Ada mata kuliah.
Cepat ya, cepat ininya ya.
Buat siapa itu tadi?
Buat anak
Semuanya satu berarti.
belajar coding semuanya, regardless department.
Karena sih, oh kayak MKDU kalau di sini semua dapat.
KU ya.
So kita udah bikin kayak statement AI, terus Chinese language teaching juga sekarang pakai AI.
Memang tidak bisa dimusuhi dan dihindari.
Iya benar PMS.
Brain tinggal kita ngatur-ngaturnya gimana.
Iya kita yang pusing kalau mahasiswa mau kuliah tugas
Nah.
pakai AI.
Detektornya kan apakah Termitin udah sehebat itu?
Kita pakai 2 targeting sama original listing. Jadi itu kalau misalkan cerita kita sidang lagi mahasiswa.
Oh ya, sebenarnya lebih fair begitu mengajarkan tentang AI, tapi kasih sanksi yang sangat tegas.
Iya.
Kan
Iya.
lebih fair kan?
Iya benar.
Jadi nggak boleh ini.
Iya, dan tugasnya juga dibikin in kelas gitu, jadi semua mahasiswa nggak bisa ngerjainnya harus di kelas supaya dia nggak bisa pulang terus ngomongin AI.
Oh ngerjainnya di kelas.
Ngerjain.
Terus kepantau ya ini. Karena pakai wifi-nya.
Iya, dan kita semua bisa ngeliat kan kalau di kelas kan mereka nggak berani buka GPT.
Oh iya karena kelihatan kanan kiri ya.
Iya.
Oh.
Kayak lagi banyak banget nih, kita juga lagi ngomongin buat teaching and learning.
Oh, mekanismenya yang dikuatin ya. Kalau udah mulai tekun ya susah ya. Gimana kalau udah tekun?
Kalau Jeffrey ngajak dari post graduate ngajar.
Saya ngajar, iya, semesternya ngajar S3 sama
S3.
satu.
Sehingga asisten profesor udah boleh ya.
Oh, makanya academic writing ngajar S3.
Salah satunya ininya,
Iya.
subjeknya.
Iya, cuma saya pepetnya jadi 1 jam, semoga nggak terlalu.
Oke, Dr. Jeffrey Octavianus, I think we will start with the event now. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, fellow lecturers of Faculty of Communication Science, Universitas Multimedia Nusantara. I'm very glad that we are here. I think I see 8 million people gathered here, and the space is too crowded for us to even enjoy for writing the Scopus Index journals, the articles, yeah. And we are very glad also and very delighted here because our fellow speaker, yeah, guest speaker, invited speaker, Jeffrey Octavianus, PhD, yeah, ex-alumni of alumnus of Universitas Multimedia Nusantara. Let's give applause. He was the same batch with Ibu Helga, yeah, and because Ibu Helga contacted him and he said that he will be more than delightful to share his insightful thoughts and commentaries and also writing tips, yeah, on this academic journal, academic writing for Scopus journal. Dr. Jeffrey Octavianus, or Jeffrey Octavianus, PhD, is assistant professor in the Department of English Communication at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. He earned his doctoral degree in Media and Communication from the City University of Hong Kong. So I think it's adjacent, yeah? Adjacent to the Hong Kong Polytechnic. His research focus on new media and social change, particularly in the context of health and politics. He investigates how new media can be leveraged to create changes in individuals and communities, particularly to address emerging and pervasive issues, including online mis- or disinformation and health disparities, and to facilitate participatory communication. His research also frequently engages with underrepresented groups such as migrant communities. And we also know that in Hong Kong there are many migrant communities. Jeffrey's work has appeared in top peer-reviewed journals such as Journal of Communication. This is the top tier journal of the ICA, I think. Journal of Communication. Health Communication, also top tier journal from ICA. Information, Communication and Society, and Computers in Human Behavior. And I think several others, if I'm not mistaken from looking at your Google Scholar.
All right.
Yeah. And Jeffrey also served as an ad hoc reviewer for journals such as Health Communication, Environmental Communication, Social Science and Medicine, among others. So without further ado, please welcome and we give the floor to Dr. Jeffrey Octavianus.
Thank you very much.
Hong Kong dari Hong Kong.
Should I share my slides in the Zoom?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and thank you so much for having me. First of all, thank you so much for the very kind introduction behind that. And thank you so much for hosting me today. So once again, my name is Jeffrey. If you don't know that I actually graduated here, and probably as Pahenda has mentioned, I was like with Helga back then and look at us now. So it's kind of like interesting because there's like I'm so glad to be back after 10 years, but there is this refresh of roles which like make it so much stranger somehow. So sorry.
Now you pitch.
Exactly. I was like, what is this? But that's great. So first of all, Helga and I apparently published something last year in public health, and after that we talk about like what other things that we can collaborate on, and one of them is like knowledge transfer, usually through the academic talks. And apparently this semester I'm actually teaching academic publication for writing the presentation for the PhD students in my department. And Helga was like, why don't we bring it here? So here it is. But just to let you know, because this is actually one semester materials that I squeeze in 1 hour. So, so it's gonna be it's gonna be very, very brief and very, very dense. But if you have any questions, please do like let me know. And I apologize in advance that in this kind of like session, we're gonna like I'm gonna deliver it in English because there was once I delivered the presentation in Bahasa and I don't know somehow the terms in Indonesian and I stuttered a lot. So I know Bu Nick is here. Bu Nick, maaf. Duta Bahasa UMN ya. Agak-agak. Duta Bahasa pertama loh. Takut banget. Yeah, but if you have any questions and if you have like something to share, please do feel free to share it either in English or Bahasa. I'm very happy to do that. And today we're going to talk about academic writing and publication, which I'm pretty sure that you have extensive experience in this field as well. So if you have any things to share, feel free to do so. I'm very happy to connect here.
Kompas juga punya e-papernya, yaitu Kompas ID, terus kemudian Kompas TV dan Kompas.com. Terus kemudian
There are online participants.
kami membuat program kami bertambah halamannya.
All right.
Okay.
Today we're going to discuss about two important things. First of all, is the academic writing for publications, and after that, we're going to talk about navigating publication process. And at the end, we will have a quick Q&A sessions and discussion sessions, and I'll also have a sponsored content that I'm going to share with you a bit later. All right. So talking about academic writing for publications, I'm pretty sure that all of us have like to some extent experience in conducting research and writing plans, right? And as a communication practitioner or journalist before, we have written press releases or even like news articles. But academic writing is its own genre. It's a slightly different aspect when you're writing press release or also when we are kind of like writing news stories. Because there are many things that we need to consider. I'm so sorry if like it's kind of small, but hopefully you can still get it. There are different things that we need to consider. The first one is the audience. So if we are a journalist, certainly we definitely need to kind of like think about the general public, right? When we are press releases, we need to think about the journalists and others. But as kind of like a scholars who are writing for publications, it's really important to consider that our audience is the journal editors and also communities in academia. So that's why the way we write the papers is going to be different, because it must be like using a very good terminology that is accepted by the academic community. And although like some journals nowadays also try to kind of like ask all the authors to create an abstract that is comprehensible to non-specialists. Which is, if you are like a kind of like a scholar, it's actually quite challenging, for example, to find a way how to define self-efficacy in a layman term. It's quite challenging, right? But then it's our job as well to kind of like define these academic terms and translate it into the layman kind of like concepts as well. Apart from that, the style is also different. When you're trying to write an academic paper, certainly it must be in a formal English, right? Because when we are writing in formal English, reviewers, when see it, they will think it as a simplistic. They know that we are an amateur kind of like researcher, a novice researcher, and that's very dangerous because the first impression matters. When you write a paper and then like they can see that we have a sloppy writing, it's very likely that they may not have a good impression, and they may think that the design of the research itself is problematic as well, because knowing that we are an amateur kind of like scholars. So that's why it's really important to also write it in formal English to kind of like show our kind of expertise, even though the ideas that we convey in the research itself is very complex. So look at us, like the challenges are not only in teaching, but also in research, right? And also the purpose of the writing. There are different ways and different purposes of the writing. It's not only about informing people, but also showing our expertise as a researcher. And also to kind of like persuade others, telling them that our research is very important. But what we're going to talk today is specifically about the flow and also the organizations. I believe that we already know the organizations, but then like how it flows from the top to the bottom, from the start to the end, something that is also very crucial because the way we convey our arguments and making it in a logical process is very important. And finally, certainly, presentations about the proofreading, but I'm not going to talk about that a lot because it's more like English proficiency. And as you know, we have ChatGPT who can do the proofreading. Or we can hire like professional proofreaders, right? So we're going to talk about today flow and organizations. But the most important thing when you're writing a research is making an argument. Have you ever thought about like what we actually would like to write? So before we start our writing, it's very important to think about what is the argument that we would like to convey. In other words, when you're a marketer, what is the selling point of our research? Before we write, it's really important to think about one single argument, one single selling point that we would like to sell to the editors and make it consistent. So in marketing, maybe they call it as a selling point, but then in the research, we call it as an argument, right? So it's really important to have one single argument that we would like to sell to show the innovativeness of our research and the newness of our research to attract the readers and especially the journal editors, right? We really need to suck them up. Sorry to say that. Forget it's recorded. And one thing is that we need to kind of like write it in a very concise way, usually it's only 1 or 2 sentences, and make sure that our research discusses surrounding this argument. So our introduction, our method, our results, and our discussion and conclusion need to convey the same message. That is our single argument. And more importantly, it's also really important to support our argument with the evidence. So then how we should convey our argument? Well, there are different structures. Usually there are 2 different structures in writing our argument. The first thing is that we first define the problem. What is actually happening in the existing literature? Right? We need to do a review of our literature, find the problem, let it be a gap, a void, or something that we think is wrong, And after that, we need to convey how we connect our study to this existing literature. Right? So we need to convey our main idea of the research, that we solve the problems that we find in the existing literature. And after that, we need to convey our evidence, what we found in our study that can support our kind of argument or our case. So this is basically like how we usually write our arguments. And usually we need to have this argument kind of like in the front page or like in the first couple of pages of our research. To make it more simple, even you can just say that through my study of what our topic is, I found that our evidence, and then we suggest the idea and we say it is true. So this is the easiest and compelling way to kind of like write our evidence. But certainly you can kind of like write it differently. I personally don't like to use like the first pronounce or like third pronounce like we. I usually just use this study times two so. But then some people love to do it because it's more kind of like storytelling instead of like making a dispense with the readers. So it really depends on like what's your preference. But make sure that if you already start with we, then make it consistent across the study. If you use this study, then make it consistent as well across the studies. Then kind of go back in. Okay. But apart from the arguments, the structure is also very important. So I think like we all are familiar with this, right? And I hope it won't bring a trauma in you. When you're writing dissertation or thesis, we certainly need to write introduction, method, results, and discussion. So there is a linguist called Highland who developed this IMRD model, which is like introduction, methods, results, and discussion. And I remember that I know the Pambang is here. When I took his class in Introduction to Journalism, he talked about how in journalism we have this pyramid terbalik, right? So from general to specific, right? But this kind of like structure in the research is slightly different. It goes from general to more specific and goes back to the general. So we start by like telling the people about the existing studies related to our topic in our introductions and move more specific to our research and how it's connected to this kind of like broader topics or like existing literature. And then after that, in the discussion section, we go back again about the purpose of our study and connect them to the existing literature. So it goes back to the general one. So when we are writing research, we need to keep in mind that first thing first, we need to talk about the whole kind of like structure or the whole idea of the existing literature. And then goes back to our specifics for context and moving back again and connect them again to the general idea. So I'm going to discuss very briefly each of them. I hope I didn't bore you with that. But again, we're going to start from the introduction and then literature review. Honestly, I hate introduction so much because it's the toughest part of a research, which I believe you may have experienced as well. Because we always say that aside from title and abstract, introduction is the base of our research. This is like where we sell our research because every reviewers, every journal editors, before they read the whole research, they will read this kind of like introductions first. So, and as we know that journals have very limited space and like so many readerships, so we compete with others to kind of like get a research space, and then we need to kind of like sell our research in the introduction session. So the introduction session matters a lot because this is where we build the first impression about our research, right? So we need to kind of like make it very appealing in order to receive the acceptance or recognition from our readers and also from the journal editors. And therefore, actually, many writers have their own organizational structure when they create introductions. I don't know if you are aware of this, but actually in the introduction section, there is a logic of progressions that we actually need to follow. Although certainly different fields may have different kind of like logical progressions, but usually in social science and humanities in our field, there is also logical progressions that we do. Although again, I need to emphasize that when in Rome, do as Romans do. If you publish your papers in other kind of field, maybe in information science, for example, it may be like different kind of progressions. But basically, there is like linguists, there are so many linguists who did a research of like the logical regression patterns of research articles. So they go through different kinds of research articles and they find different sections of the introductions that serve for certain purposes. They call it move analysis. So in move analysis, there are different parts that called moves. So moves are like sections or parts in the research that serve for a specific communicative purposes. And from this kind of like moves, they also have little sections, usually 1 or 2 sentences of each one, called steps. So in each kind of like part of our study or our paper, they serve for certain communicative purposes called moves. And each of them gonna talks about different steps. So today I'm gonna talk.
Like chess.
Yeah, a very strategic kind of like way of writing, right? So each sentence in our paper serve for a certain purposes. And we need to keep that in mind because we have very limited words in our research, right? So there is this linguist called Swalls who actually go through hundreds of research articles in different disciplines and develop these models for creating a research space or cars, which are used to kind of like write the introduction section. Have you ever heard about this before? Okay, good. So new thing today.
Yes.
So cars models argue that in the introduction section, there are 3 different moves or 3 different sections that serve from different purposes. The first one is establishing centrality, talking about the importance of our topics. And moving away is establishing a niche, going to a more specific part by finding the research gaps in the literature studies. And after that, occupying the niche, like how our research can actually serve to kind of fill these research voids or research gaps and provide solutions to the existing literature. And each of them also have small steps, but I'm gonna talk very general for today. And I'm gonna talk to you like one by one. So in the introduction section, when we first start our research, it's really important to talk about the centrality of our research, meaning that we would like to need to discuss why this broad research area is very important, or like why there is a problems emerging in this research field. And after that, we need to follow that by introducing previous research in this area. Why is really important? Because like when we know that there are actually many scholars who are also researching in this area, it shows the importance of this research. And that's why it's worth to kind of like actually go through this research because there are a lot of people who are researching this. This is an important study, it's worth to be studied, and it will kind of give theoretical contribution or like many implications to the knowledge. Right? So it's really important to first talk about the importance of our topic and then review the literature in the study very briefly, because after that, we will still have the literature integrated. So this is an example. I'm going to show you a lot of like examples from my study, not that I would like to show off, but it's just I'm more familiar with my work. So I'm just going to give it. This is a study with my colleague, John Robert Bautista. He's now in the University of Missouri in the United States. So we talk about health misinformation, like how, and we kind of like start our research. And so this study is like understanding the factors that lead healthcare professionals like doctors and nurses to actually correct and report online health misinformation that they found on online platforms. So the first thing in the introduction sections, we would like to kind of like talk about the centrality, about the importance of like health misinformation. And that's why we say that health information becomes like a major public health concerns. And we also slightly talk about studies in this field. And after that, we talk why it's important to study like factors related to the corrections of health information on online platforms. And after that, we try to kind of establish the research territory by discussing studies in this field, showing the people that, hey, there have been like many studies related to this field. So then that's why this is a growing area and it's really important for us to also jump in the bandwagon and research this field. So it's really important first in the beginning of introductions to kind of give the overview of the topic to show the importance or the problems emerging in this field. And that's why this is a worth studied topic. And after that, we even emphasize more on like the problems by talking, there are also like ways to express the centrality. For example, we can say extensively, there is a growing interest, we focus on major issues, serious problems, increasing concerns, many important, these kind of like expressions indicate the centrality, the importance and also problems emerging in the topic, right? So it's pretty convenient now. We have kind of template in writing the research, so we can kind of like use and borrow different kinds of like expressions in the study. But then after claiming the centrality, talking about the problems and also the importance of the topics, we need to establish a niche. We need to kind of like talk about the research gap. And this is something that people often forget when they are writing a research. What is really important after reviewing the literature, we need to actually find that there is actually something missing in the literature review, or there is something wrong in the previous study. And that's why we would like to expand the knowledge by filling this gap. So kind of finding the problem, claiming the gap, claiming the niche, or like finding the research gap is very important because it shows that our research will have a theoretical contributions by kind of filling these research gaps. Right. So aside from like, talking about kind of like reviewing the existing literature, we need to also find the research gap in the literature. We can do that by telling there is something wrong, something's wrong in the literature review, or usually we will say that something is missing. It hasn't been studied before, so that's why it's worth to be studied. Or we can also raise the questions that kind of like generate telling people that it's unclear. Or we just say that it's been extensively studied and we would like to continue the legacy or like the tradition. So finding this research gap is very important. And then it's also something that we usually forget to kind of like do. To give an example, usually when we are writing research gap, we kind of like say label is known, like this research is still limited, so that there is kind of, it indicates that there is actually a gap in the literature. And certainly there are different ways to kind of like talks about the gaps, right? So it's really important, aside from just reviewing it, also finding the gaps that may contribute to kind of like the literature. And certainly after that, after like establishing the niche, we need to occupy the niche, telling people the purpose of our study and why we can actually offer a solution to this research. Right? Then there are different ways to express the purpose. We can just say the aim of this paper is, it's usually the last paragraph of our introductions, right? So we need to say the main purpose, and the study was designed to evaluate yada yada, and the study, the primary objectives. But apart from that, usually the end of our introduction, we also need to talk about research questions and hypotheses. This is usually, especially in other fields, I don't really see it in our kind of like field, because some fields, they don't have literature review sections. So at the end of the introductions, they need to kind of like state their research questions or hypotheses. And they also announce the principal findings, which is kind of like the arguments, but it's not very likely in our field. So it's not compulsory to kind of have this. But it's really important to briefly state the contribution of the paper. And when I say contribution, it can be theoretical and also practical contribution. Because recently scholars have been criticized that, oh, you're just like a textbook research. And like research contributes to knowledge, but not necessarily to the society. So now translational research is very. And some people also like to say the structure of the research article. I personally rarely do it because I want to save space. Because we have very limited space, and Helga knows that I'm very wordy. So that's why I try to kind of like skip this part. But as you can see, this is the example of like the last move. So in the first one, the red one, you can see that I talk about the purpose of our study. In the green one, I usually talk about the nature of our study, for example, the survey method or the methodology of our study, very, very briefly. We don't need to talk about it extensively. And we talk about the contribution of our study in the blue one. And again, it's only very briefly because we can have space in the discussion section to talk about it extensively. And then after that, we talk about literature review. And certainly, I think you have known and you have like had an experience writing literature review. It gives a overview of what is known about a particular topic and certainly the context of our study. But more importantly, also, we need to kind of like apply it in the rigor, but this is a literature review about the study. So make sure that it doesn't answer our research questions. Because if we already answer our research questions, there is no point for us to conduct the research, right? But when we're writing a literature review, I'm not sure, are you like quantitative person or qualitative person?
Qualitative person.
Very sure. You're very firm. Okay. Good. No problem. But if you're like writing quantitative study, usually you will start, it's actually both quantitative and quantitative. You will start by your main topic and also theory. And then remember that always have a theoretical framework in our research because people will pinpoint that there is no theoretical contribution. This is not really like an academic research, it's more like a market research, right? So it's really important to have theoretical contribution in our study to explain the phenomenon. And then if you are writing a quantitative study, usually we will start by our dependent variable and we move away to our independent variables. So for example, in this study, I talked about how communication infrastructure actually may affect or may provide social support for migrant domestic workers and it enhance their interpersonal empowerment or motivation, which then leads to behavioral empowerment or their community participation. So this is technically the independent variables, this is the mediators, and this is the dependent variables, right? But then the problem is not necessarily the problem, but then one main contribution of this study is about the communication infrastructure itself. Because there is a communication infrastructure theory that talks about there are many different social actors in migrant communities, including interpersonal networks, media outlets, and also community organizations, and they can make a change in migrant communities. So the main contribution is actually on the independent variables. So I will first talk about the theory, and after that I will move away to the dependent variables, the mediators, and then again going back to the independent variables. So this is the organized way in writing literature review. And then while we write literature review, we can kind of like put the hypothesis accordingly in each section. So we don't really need to wait until the end of the literature review to kind of like say our kind of like hypothesis or research questions, right? But this is another one because we have two different theories in here as the mediators, third-person perceptions or third-person theory, and social norm theory. So we start by talking about the dependent variables. They are the responses of misinformation, and then we move to the mediators, and then we talk about the independent variables. Okay, so that's how we usually organize. It's easier to lead kind of like people to follow the model that is quite complicated. But when we are writing qualitative study, it's pretty much similar with the introductions. We move from like general one to specific one. We talk about the existing literature, how we interpret the findings in the existing literature, and how it's connected to our research. So it's really important to kind of like connect back to our context. But one more important thing is that usually when we are writing a qualitative study, it's actually not only qualitative study, but also quantitative study. Unfortunately, if we conduct our research outside the United States, it's also really important to talk about the research context. For example, when we are talking about, this is a study of like Indonesian workers in Hong Kong. Not many people know about this community, right? So we need to spend kind of like a space in our research to actually talk about the context, who they are, because this may affect how we interpret our results later in the interviews or focus group discussions, right? Or this is like a paper. Do you remember the uninstall Gojek? There was like a movement to ban Gojek because one of the executives support LGBT in Indonesia. And not many people knows about this case, right? So we need to spend a kind of like space to talk about our research context. And this is something that people usually forget because they assume that everyone knows about Indonesia, right? But then the problem is that journals, the readers of the journals are like international community. So it's really important to give them the context about the settings of our research so that they understand where the results come from. So usually we write this either in the beginning of our literature review or at the end of our literature review before we talk about our method. So it's really important to kind of specify. It's very unfortunate because usually if you conduct your research in the United States, people don't even need to talk about their context because they assume that everyone understands the US. But if we come like outside, I don't, sorry, this is recorded, but this happens. So when we kind of like conduct our study in the non-US context, we need to spend space. And I know that space is very limited. It's hard to write everything in 8,000 words, but it's a must to do so. Okay, and then after that, we need to talk about methods. I feel like you are familiar in conducting research and like writing a method section. So there are information that we need to write, participants, measures, procedure, and analysis. And again, there are also different moves in the meta section. So usually we'll start our meta section by again reminding the readers about the purpose of our study. And after that, write our subjects and our methods, the locations, the procedure, the limitations if we have any, and also the data analysis. For limitations, we can talk about in the meta section or at the end of our paper in the discussion section, because we can talk about it as well there. Right? And again, these lists are like not necessarily appear in the same order like this. You can kind of like move back and forth, or you can even like skip of them, some of them, or recycle like some of them, right? But more importantly is that our method is the most important section in our research. Again, I keep saying that every section is really important, but why is it really important? Because aside from introductions, usually reviewers will look at the method. For research design will lead to poor results, and that will affect the entire study. So that's why we need to kind of write our method section as detailed as possible. Make sure that other people can actually replicate our study. And replication is important because it gives reliability and credibility to our research, knowing that other people can actually retest and triangulate our study and replicate our study, right? So when we are writing our meta section, try to write as detailed as possible, but how detailed should it be? Just think about if we have a certain procedure in experiments, if we don't include that step, will they kind of like fail the experiments? Will the experiments fail? If that's the case, it means it's important steps and we need to write it down in our paper. So again, make sure that everyone can follow our method and they can conduct the same study. So that's how we do it usually. Yeah, so make sure that they kind of, our readers understand and they can replicate our study, and that's how we do it. Right? And just some grammar kind of thing. When we are writing a meta section, make sure that you write in past tense because we have conducted the study, right? So it happens in past tense unless we try to kind of like present the summarized data, or we would like to introduce the figures or tables. So usually we write it in the present tense. And again, usually some journals like International Journal of Communication, they discourage the use of passive voice. But actually it gives variety in our research. So we can have a balance of like active and passive voices in writing our meta section. And certainly transition and linking phrases are important because we talked about steps, right? Procedure. So we can use different kinds of transition phrases, like additionally, also, moreover, furthermore, to just like give like a better flow of our argument page when we're writing a meta section. And now moving forward to the result section, which is the most interesting part. I'm good. Thank you. Yeah, so usually when we are writing our result section, there is something that we call parallelism, meaning that our result section should mirror our introduction and our literature review. So the progression that we kind of like where we produce or introduce our concepts in the literature review should also be the same with like how we introduce our results. So for example, in the quantitative study, if we talk about hypothesis 1, 2, 3, 4, then our results should also follow the same progression as 1, 2, 3, 4. If we conduct qualitative study and we propose 2 research questions, for example, RQ1 and RQ2, then our result section should also follow the same logic. We should introduce RQ1 or RQ2. Or if we have 1 research question only, what should we do? Well, then the introduction, the result section should start by the most significant and important results first, and goes to the less significant one. Because the most interesting one is the most appealing part, right? The juiciest part of all. So we would like to make sure that people will read it first before they read arguments. So that's how we write our result section. But again, before we start, we need to remind the readers what is like the main purpose of our study. We will keep mentioning it again and again over the different kind of sections. So this is, for example, this is a quantitative study. We talk about. I know, sorry, this is like another good time to talk about numbers. But usually we will start by talking about the purpose of our study, and then we follow the progression up this 1, 2, 3, and then 4. So that's like how we kind of like do it, right? But also when we are writing qualitative study, it's a different thing, right? Because we don't have numbers, which is a fun way. But then I don't know, like, if you do this as well, but if you do a qualitative study with focus group discussions or interviews, you usually will kind of protect the identity of your participants, right? And usually there are different ways to do that by like using name codes, like P1, P2,
Yeah.
P3, P4, yada,
ACC.
yeah, ABC, or U1, U2, 3, how that did that. Or sometimes you also use pseudonym, right? Like you give different names to the participants to kind of protect. And actually, it's very interesting.
Mawar.
Mawar, ya, sebut saja bunga gitu. Sebut saja mawar.
Mawati.
But it's very interesting because like recently I have like some reviewers who told me that better than like using an name code, it's really important to use a pseudonym instead. Why? Because it gives a voice to the participants and we treat the participants as a human as well. So giving names make a lot of change to like the research. So that's why in this research, for example, I actually start with my first review using a participant like name code because it's so much easier, P1, P3, very straightforward. But then they would like, the reviewers dislike that. And then they try to kind of like ask me to use pseudonym instead to kind of give the voice to the participants. So it makes changes apparently for
It does not
reviewers.
fabricate
Well, we can kind of do that, but I mean like, it's to have like humanize our participants as well, right? So it's very important to do so. And usually when we are writing a qualitative study, we will need quotes or excerpts, right? From our content, from our participants. But some people just like, I reviewed some papers that they just list different quotes and say that this participants talks about, let's say, the social support, informational support, for example, and then list different quotes. And then goes to the second team. Another participants also talk about emotional supports, and then goes to different kinds of like quotes to kind of make a point of it, right? But that is a very descriptive way to kind of like write a qualitative study or qualitative results. Aside from just like giving quotes, we as a researcher need to interpret again what the quotes talk about. So for example, once we give a quote, we kind of like give the interpretations, like her story indicates something. Her story shows something. So we don't just like give like a very descriptive results about the quotes because as a qualitative study, especially, we need to be very critical about our results, right? And we need to interpret our results to kind of like let other people know what the arguments they would like to make from these quotes. So it's really important as well to kind of like give interpretation for the quotes that include. And make sure that don't just like include any kind of quotes. Make sure that they are representatives of the study. So try to find the best one out of them. Okay. And yeah, sorry.
How do you cut with the dot, and then continue with another sentence, and then dot, another sentence? How do you combine from 4 or 3 or 5 different sets of responses?
Oh, that's a good question. Actually, no, this is actually comes from like one kind of like response. So when I interviewed my domestic workers, they love to talk. And it's just like very, very long. So I just like cut the parts that they kind of like make point. But then if you actually like to report different responses, you need to include all the dialogue, including what you say as an interviewer. So there's kind of like a dialogue because different responses. So to give more context to the readers as well. Yeah, so this is just like one quote that I cut to kind of like reduce the words because of the word limit. Yeah, that's the really good question. Yeah. Any questions so far? No? Okay, then I will continue. And certainly as well, when we're writing our results, make sure that we remove the excess, carry the sentence length, and also the structure of the sentence. So I'm going to talk to you what might be. So sometimes when we write our results sections, not even the results, but also the introduction section and other kinds of sections, we tend to be very wordy. And then the problem is that every journal has a word limit that we need to kind of follow, right? So we need to make sure that we remove all unnecessary part by like removing the excess. How we do that? Usually when we have a paragraph, we can highlight the parts that are substantive, that are very important. And those who are not highlighted, meaning they're just like explanatory phrases or words, or they are like actually the excess. We don't really need them to explain our points. So we need to read through again, especially those parts that we have not highlighted, and we can rephrase it or even cut them to make sure that we make a point fairly straightforward and concise.
Yeah.
For example, here we have a paragraph with 104 words, right? And then we highlight it yellow, all the parts that are very, very important. And then those four that highlighted, meaning that they're just like explanatory phrases, they are not very important, they can be just like even just an excess. So we can cut them or rephrase them. And we can kind of like make it more concise. So from 104, we can kind of keep 70 words only, and we still make the same point. So if you have a tendency like me to write it very wordy and languid, then we can kind of like just start. But apart from that, also make sure that we vary the sentence in terms of the length. So there is a Goldilocks principle in our each pages or in each paragraph. Make sure that we have long, short, and also medium of sentences, because we don't want to bore our readers. So make sure that it also varies in terms of the sentence line. And we can kind of like ask ourselves whether we need variety, or like ask ourselves what combinations that is very effective in conveying our arguments, right? But apart from that, also the structure, there is a balance of active and passive voice. If you want to know more about this, you can read this book, Functional Grammar. But then usually keep in mind, right, that's true, very semiotics one. But make sure that when it's an active voice, we put lots of emphasis on the actors who perform the actions. While for the passive voice, the active agents, the one who can that the actions disappear, and then the focus goes to the recipient of the actions or the actions itself. Right. So that's why there are different kind of like shifting on the focus in the sentence. But again, writing passive or active choice is kind of like your choice, right? So you can do that as well, but make sure that it gives variety to your writing. Okay, moving to the last part, discussion and conclusion, which is another important section. So there are different ways of writing discussions, right? Some people will write like unsection discussions. There is no sections under the discussions. They are very, very straightforward. There's a whole different kind of like section for discussion. Some people will have like some subsections of discussions. So if we have like a heading of discussions, under there we will have like some subheadings under the discussions, right? To make and organize the points better. Some will combine discussions and conclusions, and this is usually what I do because to save space, so we can just like merge them all together. But some will have separate kind of like part for conclusion. And then if we have multiple studies, for example, we have 2 different experiments in our study, we will have like a discussion for experiment 1, discussion experiment 2, and we have another section for general discussion. So there are different ways in writing discussion and conclusion. But certainly, which one should we do? It depends on the journals. Some journals ask you and ask us to have a separate conclusions. Some don't care at all. So we need to consult with journal requirement, which section. But I personally prefer to have a combination of discussion and conclusion because sometimes I feel like they're pretty much the same and it saves the space. But then some journals, especially in the information science, I think if I'm not mistaken, like computer and human behavior, for example, or telematics and informatics, they hope you have a separate conclusion. And then we need to kind of like play with the rules, right? So check again the journal requirement and make sure that we follow the guidelines. But for discussion sections, there are also different rules. The first one is that we need to, again, restate the purpose of our study. And the most important one, we need to present the key results. So usually in the beginning, the way I do it is that the first sentence is going to be the purpose of our study. And then I will talk about the key results of our study. And then each paragraph, I'm going to talk about each key finding in separate ways. And in each paragraph, we give a comments of the key results, whether they support, whether our finding supports previous studies, or like whether our finding actually contrasts with the previous study. And then we need to offer the alternative explanation why it happens, why our hypothesis is rejected, why our findings are different from the previous studies, right? And then at the end, we can talk about the limitations and then also recommendations for future studies and also the implications of this study. So this is very important. If you still remember about the structure, this is how Okay,
Okay.
should I continue? So this is like how cool. Okay. So this is how like when we go like from specific and move back to the general one, because we connect again our findings to the broader kind of literature and existing studies. And certainly when writing discussion, make sure that we don't overinterpret the results, because people love to kind of like make something excessive, giving like seasoning to the studies. Avoid the statements that go beyond the results that we can support. Make sure that we stick to the results that we have. And if we have expressions like they are not very clear, vague, or unspecific, like higher temperature, lower range, they are not very specific, right? If we can quantify them, then make sure we do so. Make sure we work as specific as possible. And some people love to kind of introduce new terms or ideas. We suddenly connect them with certain theory that we don't even elaborate on in our literature review. And that's certainly something that we should avoid, because discussion is not a place where we introduce new ideas. We connect them with the existing ideas that we have discussed in our literature review, but not a place we would like to introduce new ideas. If we would like to do so, then we need to introduce them again in the literature review to give people context or ideas about the concept that we would like to discuss. Right? And then when we are writing discussions, we need to interpret our results, right? Giving possible explanations. So there is certainly speculation, but when we are like giving speculation, make sure that we support them with evidence. And how to do so? Well, we should be rooted on the fact from previous studies. So cite someone that talks about that to give kind of like credibility to our arguments. So it's not just like merely speculations, but it's something that is supported by the fact. So our interpretation should be rooted in the fact, because we're not writing like a gossip articles, right? We don't make just like merely speculation, but then we should be based on an evidence. And sorry, let me just
The JK Rowling type. Based on imagination, then you can make another volume of novels.
Right. That's true. But when we write conclusions, usually we also start by stating our purpose or research questions. And then we state our theory and ideas and research questions. And then we describe how the findings solve or like resolve the issue, and giving the bigger picture, like the future recommendation for future studies. So this is like how you usually write a discussion section. Sorry. All right,
Okay.
so I think that's.
Before going into the navigating,
Mhm.
I think
Do you have any questions, guys?
I think now is the blanket time. Because I will be going to another session with Bar. So it is the very fortunate moment for us also.
Thank you.
Before proceeding to the question and answer for the first session and then moving on to the second session. So I will give the, what's this, the placket, yeah?
Okay.
The placket to Jeffrey.
Thank you so much.
For being our invited speakers. Okay, thank you very much.
I also have something for my department, so
Oh, okay. That's
I'm gonna
okay.
keep it. Thank you. Oh, you as well.
Wow. Wow, Department of, yes, English and Communication.
3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. Dan satu lagi. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Jeffrey, for this packet.
Oh, sorry. This was sorry.
Oh, 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 this one. Okay.
Sorry.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's nice.
It's very nice. And it will be alone in the baggage.
Exactly. Gonna put it in my
Not
office,
happy.
showing off the people. Like a fully member of the UMN community.
And the extensive member
Exactly.
in Hong Kong.
Exactly. Before we proceed, should we take like some questions, if any.
And also from the Zoom, maybe some of the participants, the 13,000 people in the Zoom, maybe is that, or you still remember Missy Melita?
Oh yeah. For the boss.
Hell fever, hell
Yeah.
fever.
The option boss.
Okay, please. English club, yeah.
English club. Yeah. Is there any questions? Oh yeah.
One, please.
I was involved when you say about the pseudonames. Yeah, so I have this research, the qualitative research. And we interviewed 20 journalists from cities in Indonesia. And we have sent them, and they already signed the consent letter, which stating that they okay to be mentioned by their real name. So is it better to just reveal their name in our research, or use the P1, 2, 3, just like you said?
Right, that's a really good point. Some people prefer to kind of like some kind of like respondents or participants allow us to kind of reveal their names, but I personally will still keep their names like pseudonyms, just in case something happens, because like if suddenly they change their mind, even though they already give the consent for it, they can kind of like ask us to remove names, and then we cannot do that, because if we do that, it means we need to retract the articles, right? So for me personally, just to be safe, I will still kind of like use their name, use their pseudonym or the name post instead of like revealing their identity, just in case they will problems in the future.
Yeah.
Better be safe. Yeah, good questions though. Thank you. Any other question? Yeah.
I want to share about some of the inputs given by the, I think this reviewer, yeah, on our manuscript in Journal of Intercultural Communication Research, received on May 1st. So this is rejected.
Okay.
And I think we learned a lot because some of the inputs, constructive inputs from the reviewer said like this. First, since you have already completed your study, you should use past tense and not present or future tenses when describing the study, etc. Second, the introduction is where you address the who cares and so what questions before telling the readers the purpose of your study, etc. Number 3, before you start with the literature review section of the manuscript, tell readers the rationale of the study. So maybe I will ask you about what is this, the rationale of the study? Is that the same literature review or other things? Thank you.
Before we start the literature review, we need to talk about the rationale of the study. I feel like the rationale of the study should be done in the introduction section, not the literature review, because that's where you show the importance of your topics, right?
The importance of topics.
Right. So that's why, like in the literature review, in the introduction sections, we talk about the importance of our study, the gaps, because the gaps means that there is something missing, and that's why it's really important for us to kind of fill the gap. And when we are occupying the niche in the last move, we talk about the purpose of our study, how our study can provide solutions. And also we talk about contributions of our study that answers the so what questions, right?
Oh, the so what?
Yeah, because people love to ask like so what questions. It happens in like peers every time. And that's like why it's really important to convince them that our study is important by like talking about this different kind of like importance from different angles. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's a really good question. So what question always happens?
So what?
Always like, I have that
And
question.
who cares also this one? Who cares and so what?
Exactly. But I feel like they are interconnected, right? So like when we kind of like talk about contributions, for example, when we are talking about theoretical contributions and also practical contributions, it serves like the who cares about them, because those scholars in this area will care about that because there is a theoretical implications of it. And then the practitioners, for example, I usually mention in contributions like directly, like stakeholders, like the government can use this to kind of like promote corrections of health misinformation, for example. So you can just like directly state the stakeholders that may be kind of affected practically by your research. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. If not, I will just go
Yes.
briefly to the last point. Okay, I'll make it quick. So, because I feel like every one of us already know how to navigate the publication process, right? Which is daunting and exhausting. I kind of like know that. Because why? In every step of the way, there is always rejections on us, right? Let it be when we submit a paper, it can be rejected by the editors. We call it test rejections,
Yes,
usually, right? Or you can go to peer review, and after that, after the peer review again, it can be rejected, or we will be invited to revise our paper. And then once we revise, it can still be rejected. Or we can be invited for the second round of site revision. I don't know, like how many rounds have you experienced? My kind of like the most exhausting one is like 4 rounds of revisions.
Got 7.
You got 7? Boy. You have like great perseverance. Yeah, but sometimes you get like multiple rounds of revisions and it can still end up with rejections, even though it's only a minor revision even,
Yeah.
right? But sometimes it can be get accepted, or like you can get rejections. But there are also some cases that you get accepted once you get the first peer review. So acceptance with a revision. It happens to one of my colleagues. So he submitted in the Media, Culture and Society from
Video.
yeah, which is like a very good journal as well. And then he got the feedback in 3 months, and then it's like acceptance without revision. So it's kind of like a miracle, we call it, because it rarely happens, but it happens. So that's such a miracle. But yeah, as you can see that usually rejections haunt us, but then keep in mind that there is always like a light at the end of the tunnel, because there's always getting acceptance at the end of the day, right? Even though it may take so long. But then the question is that how long do we need to wait? Well, there is no one can explain that, necessarily that, because it really depends on the frequency of the publications. In the past, we always rely a lot on the print publication, right? So then like we need to wait until the volume is issued, and some journals usually just like publish 4 volumes in a year. Now, given like there are so many scholars, usually they will like publish it every month. But also because the advancement of technology and there is this online publications, usually we can have it online first, right? So that's why it can be even faster than before. But usually to review for 1 round in communication field and journalism field, usually takes like 3 to 6 months. Although some journals are like so much faster, like Social Media Society or New Media Society, usually go back with you like 1 or 2 months.
Oh.
But I don't know why. My observation is that if there's journalism, kind of like journals, usually it takes longer. So it really depends on the field as well. But to get an idea how long the review process is, some journals actually indicate like this first submission of the articles in each article. So you can see like how long usually they come like from the when they receive the manuscript until the acceptance. And you can see here that they received the manuscript in 20 January 2023.
1 year.
And then accepted in 30 January 2024. So 1 year. Right? So it's pretty common, unfortunately, in our field, right?
That's a deal.
Yeah, because this also comes from a good publisher. Or some journals also like mentioned the average days of acceptance from submissions in their kind of like stocks as well. So it's a lot of time to wait and a lot of time to waste as well. But it happens. It's also for the sake of the rigor of the review, right? So we need to do that. But then the question also like which journal that we need to select, right? There's so many journals and there are so many Scopus journals that we like to kind of aim which one that is a good fit for our paper. Usually my take is that I will look at the references, which journal that I cite the most, because it means that our paper will talk to the research in that journal and the journal is familiar with our topic. So usually I will go with like the most cited journals in my kind of like paper. But we can also look at the topic and also the journal coverage. And certainly we need to ask some questions because nowadays there are so many predatory journals, right? So we need to make sure that the journal is peer reviewed. The audience actually kind of like will be interested in our research. And if you're in a rush for like promotion or like evaluation for the tenure one, you also need to think about like the average time to print. And also the journal impact factors, because we certainly want to have like a high impact factor. And this becomes like a very like a buzzword.
Yeah.
Because in some countries, when I say some countries or some cities, it's like in Hong Kong, for example, they care a lot about the impact factor of the journals. We need to aim the high impact factors of the journals to get a good evaluation of this challenge. And there are also like different kind of like databases that kind of like make this calculation. For example, in Web of Science, they call it journal impact factor, or in Scopus, they call it site score. Right? So the way they measure impact factors are pretty much the same. The number of citations that they receive at a certain time point divided by the numbers of articles published in certain time point. But this window of the periods are different. So for site score, they have 4-year window. So yeah, so the numbers of citations that they receive, for example, from 2016 to 2019, will be divided by the numbers of articles published in that journal in 2016, 2019. But for SSCI, like Web of Science, is slightly different. So they kind of like count the numbers of like citations in 1 year, divided by the numbers of articles published in the past 2 years. So that's why if you see that, also like the Scopus, for some reason, they have like a larger number of journals as compared to the Web of Science. So they're like more selective. So that's why sometimes if you see, for example, International Journal of Communication is Q1 based on Scopus. But it's Ijab, right? From University of Southern California. But then it's actually Q3 in SFI, in the Web of Science, because the way they calculate are different and the number of journals listed in their index are also different. Yeah, so in Hong Kong, we use SSCI more than Scopus, but I know that if you would like to kind of get evaluated by Kias World Ranking, usually they will use it for Scopus. That's why there is this term of penyembah Scopus. Right? And I think like, we can relate to all of them. Yeah, but usually in Hong Kong itself, we use SSCI because we know that if it's Q3 in SSCI, it can still be Q1 in Scopus. So there is like better control of the quality. But keep in mind that even though they are listed in Scopus or SSCI, there is always a chance that they are predatory journals. Unfortunately, yeah. So they try to be credible. I don't know if you have ever heard an experience about MDPI.
Yeah, MDPI.
They are not necessarily predatory journals. I also published one in that journals, but then there was once they got kicked out of the SSCI, the Web of Science list 2 years ago, because they published too many papers, and they also asked kind of like expensive publication rate. So that's why there's no quality control, and then they got kicked out from the SSCI. So there is a better chance of quality control when they're indexed in Scopus or like indexed in the SSCI, but there is still a chance that they're not necessarily a predatory journal, but they can be like not credible journal either. Exactly. So just be careful in like choosing the journals as well, right? And again, I think like this is just some technical things. Journal may have different requirements, so make sure that we submit our paper in a Word document because it's easier for the publisher to lay out the articles when it's accepted and provide details like findings and ethics. I don't know here, but usually you need to go through like ethical reviews in your institutions, like an IRB reviews. I think that's really important, especially when it involves the sensitive topics. And human subjects, basically. Right? And then the details of co-authors, identifying markers of the authors. Nowadays, it's not only about like the name of the authors, but also whether the papers come from the authors. If you are self-cited, now you usually put a blinded as well. So you will just put in the bracket like the authors, and that's it. So there is no self-citation in some journals. Yeah, so make sure that you read the author's guideline as well nowadays. And make sure that also you remove all the metadata in the properties. Yeah, remove like your contact name as well.
By something.
Right, like usually they will have the authors and then you need to kind of like remove it as well to make sure it's really anonymous. And make sure that it hasn't been submitted to other journals. So don't submit the paper, 2 papers at once, because once you get accepted in both paper, which is great, but then the problem is that you will kind of like have a self-plagiarism. right? You compete, like you kind of like publish in two different papers, and it's considered as self-plagiarism. Or if you get accepted in one journal and the other one is still in the peer review process, you withdraw your paper in the peer review process. It's a waste of resources in that journal because it takes a lot of effort to find reviewers for a paper. And then if you withdraw it in the middle of the process, then they can actually use the resource for another submission, but then they already like waste it on your submission. So it's why we always like need to declare usually in our cover letter that we don't submit our paper in another journals. Although like it takes forever to publish something, right? Yeah.
What about the same set of data, but we have two different theoretical frameworks and then becoming two different papers?
Oh, that's certainly fine.
It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. But then some people in the acknowledge, I have a survey data, like I work with a supervisor with, we use the same survey data for 7 different papers, and that's completely fine.
Okay.
Because as long as like it doesn't kind of like, we don't use the same variables or like we don't use like the same concepts and it's the same purposes. But then some people usually will state in acknowledgement that this data has been used for another paper.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so, and then when we write acknowledgement, usually it will not go to the blind review, right? So
Yeah.
the reviewers will not know as well, but we already state that the data has been used in another study.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can always write that in your acknowledgement. That's a really good question. Yeah, but because it takes a lot of effort to do the data collection, especially if you're doing interviews, it's so
Yes,
hard to do
interviews,
questions, right? So usually you can kind of like, I have like one data set that I can use for 2 different papers, and that's completely fine. Yeah, but if you want to make it an open, because ICA now is like about open science, you can state it in your acknowledgement.
Yes.
All right, so again, also make sure that citation style, I'm not a fan of like citation style because like when it get rejected and I submit it to another journal, I need to change the citation style to another kind of like thing. But it happens, like I talked to the editor-in-chief for health communication, Professor Terry Thompson, and she said that she can understand APA style even in her dream because she keeps checking about the APA style for each submission. Terry Thompson, yeah. So editors really care. It may sounds like a kind of like teeny bitty like small things, but then they care a lot about it to make it consistent. And then, but don't worry, like now we have lots of citation software, right? EndNote, Mendeley, Zotero. But then if we have that, make sure that we unlink the citation in our paper before we submit it, because otherwise it may kind of get messed up, right? And some journal has their own punctuation style, the spelling style. If it's American English, make sure it's consistent throughout the paper. And again, submit to only one journal at a time. And again, make sure that it's followed. Sorry, I think like, I'm gonna need to know the title otherwise.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, make sure that it follows the author's guidelines, follow the correct format, spelling grammar errors, have contact information, and also persuasive cover letter. When you're writing cover letter, make sure that we convince the editor that our topic may be in the interest of the readers, right?
So cover letter. I think the cover letter is not what we are getting used to here, writing in Indonesia.
Right. So the cover letter is slightly different when you're like writing cover letter for like a paper submission, because usually in the beginning we will just say that we would like to submit our paper, the title and the authors, and we give like a brief abstract of our papers and tell them why it may be an interest of the readers of that journals. And then we declare that we only submitted to one journal, and then at the end, just thank them. Because some editors will read the cover letter before they just reject the paper to kind of see whether the paper fits or not with the journals. So sometimes writing persuasive cover letter is really important. Although like some editors actually rely on their PhD students to kind of review the journals before they kind of like end up with it. Yeah, they have like editorial assistants that they are usually PhD students. So PhD students will read it and then the editor will make the final decisions, because the editors are also professors, right? They're also pretty busy, and then usually for a top tier journal, they receive like 7 submissions a day. So they may not have like enough time to go through all of them. So they have multiple editorial assistants who are usually postdocs or like PhD students to review the papers before they send it to the peer review. Yeah, so if you don't get that rejection, don't worry. Like sometimes don't take it very personally because sometimes it's not even the editor who had to review it. It's like really their editorial assistants who review them. Unfortunately, yeah. Okay, so what we do after submission, certainly take time to kind of like see submissions, emotionally manage the journal decisions, and also there are different kind of like acceptance, right? It can be acceptance without revisions, minor revisions, major revisions, although I feel like there's no difference between major and minor revisions. And in terms of rejections, there are also different types of rejections. It can be just rejections, rejected before they send it to the peer review. Rejection, but they will entertain the submissions. So I have one experience that they rejected my paper but they accept the revision. And then once I submit the revision, they accept directly. So rejections is not the end of all. But sometimes it can be rejected and dismissed. They will not allow the submissions and ask you to submit it elsewhere. Or it can be rejection without even reviewers report. It doesn't go through because they couldn't find the reviewers for your submission. There are also like reasons why editors rejected our paper. Usually, the most convenient reason is that the journal is not a good fit of the paper. Usually, just like it's very common reason. But sometimes it's because like we don't follow the author's guideline, especially if we get rejected and directly submit it elsewhere, we forget to change the guideline. And it's unsound because of sloppy writing, grammar errors. And also ethical guidelines. I'm going to talk about ethics more later on. And also the journals cannot find reviewers, as I mentioned. It's so hard now, and everything is getting slower because like there are not many kind of like scholars who want to review papers anymore. So it's getting harder and harder to
the preprint publication right now is quite
because it can take longer. And then when it's about AI, for example, that the technology advances so fast, they need to kind of like publish it beforehand because if they need to wait for 1 year to get it published, it's no longer like new. Right, so this one, the preprint becomes like more common because it takes forever now to kind of like review a paper. Yeah, but these are examples of the deck.
Excuse me, I will go.
Sure, thank you so much. Yes, see you again. Thank you. And these are examples of the rejections that I received in the past. Sometimes it's because of the word limit. I submit 9,500, the word limit is 8,000, but to be fair, in my defense, the journal just mentioned that like typically the submission is 8,000 words. So I was like, it's only typical, my paper is not typical. So I just submit it, and then I got this rejection out of it. And sometimes they also have the standard for the samples. For example, this journal stated that like for a survey, the minimum sample is 300. Although again, it was also very unfair because actually my submission was a qualitative study. I didn't even do a survey. So, and they still apply the same rules, or they couldn't find the reviewers, and also the plagiarism check. So this is like in a paper that they found that the similarity check achieved like 32%, which I also didn't know why. I asked them for the report and they couldn't give it to me. Or as I mentioned, the most convenient reason they just like think that it's not suitable for the publication. It happens a lot. And then if you receive this kind of like rejections, first time it's going to be very hard, but after that you will build immunity of like out of rejections, right? You get used to it already. But when we are asked to revise, make sure that you read the reviewer's letter because that usually contains the deadlines and also the instruction on how to revise it. And sometimes reviewers can be very, very mean. So emotionally manage your expectation. And I usually put aside because I usually get overwhelmed by the numbers of a major review, especially the numbers of the comments. So like I usually put it aside a day or two, and then go back and then read it, usually with my co-authors, like Helga, right? But when we kind of like are asked to revise, make sure that respond to the document in a very, very kind of like comprehensive and detailed manner. And then there is always kind of like people who say that, oh, do whatever the reviewers ask you to do. But actually, we can always disagree with the reviewers' comments. And as long as we kind of like state it politely and also give an evidence why we disagree, we give like logical reasons why we always the same thing. And again, reviewers can be very unique sometimes, the way kind of like they can keep in mind that they always give comments to improve our papers. So always see this as a chance to kind of like improve our publication before we get published. And make sure that when we write our response to the reviewers, we always like address the common themes at the start, and then kind of like organize it in a way that we can put a response, or we put numbering systems in our kind of like response to reviewer. Write it as informative and detailed as possible, because the reviewers will not have a chance to ask the clarifications, right? So that's why my longest response to reviewers is like 24 pages long. So I write as detailed as possible to make sure that they are clear about like what we might to convey. And make sure you don't ignore any point, because like if the reviewers see that, oh, you ignore one of the points, they will ask you again to do that on your second review. And it means that it will take a longer time for us to review it, right? And make sure that you are assertive. We are assertive because we're not just like a novice reviewer, right? And novice scholars. We need to kind of show our expertise, yet keep in mind that we stay polite as well. And also, I don't know if it's a cultural thing, but then there was once that I thanked the reviewer on each point that the reviewers made, and the reviewers gave a comment saying that it sounds like very insincere that I thank each of the points. So like, when you're writing a response to reviewers, just thank them in the beginning, and after that, just go through the response. And there are also different formats in writing response to reviewers. Sometimes you can just like make points and then indicate that this is a response by highlighting in different colors, or writing a response, or you can also make the tables. But make sure that every time you kind of like create a response, try to also indicate the page of the revision in the manuscript. So it's easier for the reviewers to identify, because they don't even have much time to take a look at your paper presentations. Again, bear in mind, the editor tried to help us to improve our papers so the tech offense. And even though we get minor revision, it doesn't mean it gets accepted. There is always a chance to get rejected. And when we are revising the papers, sometimes we only focus on the part pinpointed by the reviewers. But keep in mind that sometimes they are interconnected, right? So once we kind of like revise a certain point, take a look at others, whether like we need to change them as well. And as I've mentioned before, it's very common that we will have multiple rounds of page reviews. And once we get rejected, don't directly submit it to somewhere else without even any revisions. Why? Because the academia is very small. The pool of reviewer is also very small. So there is always a chance that they will send your paper to the same reviewers. And if that happens, they will get pissed. So keep in mind that try to kind of revise it before you submit it to another journals. And even though it got published, there is always a chance that the readers will give comments to the reviewers, and then the reviewers will send us a letter. So in post-publications, sometimes some authors will receive this kind of like letters from the reviewers, the editor. And once we receive it, we must respond to it, because otherwise our paper can get retracted. And retraction is very common in journals, and usually most common problems is like self-plagiarism, or the data is like unreliable, or they find that the data is fabricated. For example, this is like another paper published last year in Journal of Computer Mediated Communication, and they find some reliable data, and then the paper got retracted. Like this one. So there are so many ethical considerations that we need to take when we kind of like publish our papers. Certainly make sure that we don't plagiarize other works. Make sure we paraphrase everything inside the real author, or put direct quote inside. So whenever we are unsure, cite authors. And as I've mentioned, make sure that we also do something that is like ethical. Usually that's why we go through the ethical process. Otherwise, people may question our paper. I don't know if you ever heard this story about the paper published in 2022. So I don't know how this paper got published as a research note, and they published it in the Qualitative Research, which is like a very good journal. So this is a research note where a PhD student in the UK, he documented the way he masturbated, and then while like reading Japanese manga, erotic Japanese manga, and it got published in the qualitative research. So he explicitly documented as an ethnographic study. And then it becomes very controversial because people think that it breaches the ethical and moral kind of like issue. So then the paper got retracted. They kind of like the publisher even like conduct an investigation about this. And this PhD students got kicked out from his PhD program. So when we kind of like conduct our study to make sure that we don't kind of like breach the ethical kind of like conduct, it's really important for us to go through like ethical review process if we have like an institutional review board in our research and make sure that we don't breach this, like any kind of like ethical guidelines like this one. Okay, so it's like pretty kind of like famous thing. And apart from that, also predatory journals. As I've mentioned, we have so many predatory journals, and it's actually responsibility of us as the scholars to kind of like find credible predatory journals. But it's also a responsibility of the departments and the faculty as well to make sure the quality control of research outputs of the faculty members. So for example, in my institutions, we have what we call journal lists. So the faculty research committee actually hired external consultant to list and kind of like compile the credible journals, and they give it to the faculty research committee, and then they discuss it, and then they come up with the journal list. So now, every time we would like to publish our paper, we need to stick to this journal list because it kind of like makes sure the quality. If we don't have, or if we publish outside the list, we need to kind of give justification and evidence. Otherwise, this output will not be counted toward our research performance evaluation, unfortunately. So to avoid these predatory journals, it can actually be done from the institution's perspective on institutional level and also individual level. And again, there is also a problem with AI, right? So now everyone can write with AI. Some people also even like include ChatGPT as one of the authors. And now many journals actually kind of like forbid people to like include ChatGPT as the co-authors. And we need to declare if we use ChatGPT for proofreading or things like that. And this is also the case. This is a published paper. There is something wrong with this paragraph if you notice it.
So that's the answer from the ChatGPT.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's true. If you see the beginning, this is kind of like the prompt from the ChatGPT. So they can clearly see and they later clarify it. But I also don't understand, like, it goes to reviewers and editors, like, how they miss this point, because it's very clear, it's in the introduction section. So beware of that if you use ChatGPT. Or this is another case. So this is an image generated by AI. And they put it, and it also becomes a conversation. Why? First of all, we don't know the copyright issue. Who actually own this image, right? Second of all, actually they also make mistakes. I'm not coming like from biology kind of like field, but there is like something wrong with the anatomy of the mice that they put it, and there is also like a typo here. So when you are kind of like relying, keep in mind that AI can help us, but it's not the main source. So we need to do our due diligence to actually kind of like see whether the results from the AI is accurate and whether like the results that we put in our research is also accurate. Because like if we find like mistakes like this, our credibility as a researcher is something that kind of will damage, right? So keep in mind about the use of AI. Okay, so I think that's all I can share for today. But before I close my sessions, I have a sponsored content for you. So if you are interested do a PhD program. As a good faculty member of my department, I need to kind of like share a little bit of the advertisement for our program. So we have like what we call Hong Kong PhD Fellowship Scheme, or like HKPFS. If you are interested to do a PhD program in Hong Kong, Please do so. We have a very generous scholarship for you, and please keep in mind that to choose our program, the Department of English and Communication. So I'm going to show you a little bit about our program and also HKTFS if you don't mind. So our department is the Department of English and Communication at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Our mission is linguistic excellence in professional context. So even though we are like a linguistic department, but we are also interdisciplinary departments that comprise like researchers from linguistics and also communication like me. So, and also the faculty members come from all around the world. We have like scholars from the UK, the US, Singapore, Indonesia now, and also like the local students. And all you also like have like well-known scholars from all around the world. We have like over 200 scholars listed as the top 2% cited, most cited scientists based on the Stanford University. And 2 of them come from our faculty. For example, Professor Liping is the dean of our faculty, and Professor Tu Kwang Wei is actually a full professor in our department at the NGL, Department of English and Communication. And based on the world ranking, since like we often quantify, OU is ranked 65 based on KS world ranking, and by subject, linguistic, which is like our department is listed as the number 73. The 73rd, we are like above the University of Queensland, University of York, and Columbia University in terms of like by subject in linguistics. We also have 5 different areas. We have language and professional communication. So if you're interested in political communication, health communication, professional communication, or scholarly communication, this is for you. And media and communication as well. And this is my stream, area studies and intercultural communications. But we also have linguistic streams like language teaching and learning, and also English language and applied linguistics. And we also have 2 research centers, International Research Center for the Advancement of Health Communication and Research Center for Professional Communication in English. So and the members of these research centers are not only our faculty members, but also scholars from other universities. So if you want to build connections, this is like where you can do. And we also like have pretty kind of productive scholars in our department. So aside from publications, many of our faculty members also publish books. And we also keep receiving external grants. For example, a couple of years ago, 5 of our faculty members got funding from the Hong Kong government for around like 3.71 million Hong Kong dollar, or around like 6.7 billion rupiah, like 6 million rupiah in 1 year. And we also offer pretty generous. So HKPFS is a government-funded program. So you get fellowship from the government. The annual stipend, if you get accepted to our PhD program through HKPFS, is 331 Hong Kong dollar, or approximately 681 million rupiah. So each month you will get around 50 to 60 million rupiah as your stipend. And apart from that, you will also get the annual conference grant. So if you would like to have a travel for a conference, you can get 30,000 each month, or around 28 million for a conference grant. And this is the rate for last year. So this year is gonna be even like more. And we also give tuition waiver if you get HKPFS, and you will get cash award. Once you can, you will get like settlement award for like 40,000 Hong Kong dollar, or like 80 million rupiah. And each year you will get 20,000 Hong Kong dollar, or 40 million rupiah until the entire study period, usually 3 to 4 years. So we have pretty short PhD program in our department. And as you know, that Hong Kong is very expensive in terms of accommodation, I should say that. But then if you come under the HKPFS scheme, then you will get guaranteed place in the dormitory for 2 years. So it's
the dormitory is for single.
I think it's for single. So if you have family, you may look up by others, but don't worry, you get like around 60 juta per bulan. So you can kind of like get a place outside as well, and you get another kind of like stipend as well, right? So it's a very generous kind of like program. So the requirement is actually pretty simple. You need to have like master's program with a thesis. So it's either MPhil or MA with thesis. And we also care a lot about the bachelor program. So usually you have first class honor, or like, I think it's cum laude. And I don't know, I may be wrong, but it also must come from like a recognized university. And it means you must also fulfill our English language requirement because it's an English instructed program. So if you don't have your master's degree in English kind of like instructed program, you need to have 6.5 for IELTS or like 550 for TOEFL. And again, it must be a valid kind of like English business, right? So usually the deadline is always like the 1st of December, but our internal deadline is the 20th November. So you still have time to kind of like prepare all documents, publish your papers so you can get like higher chance to get accepted. So the way you do it is that you will need to kind of apply and submit your document to HKPFS system. And after that, you will get the HKPFS reference number and then apply to you and then include this HKPFS reference. And usually you need to kind of like contact your potential supervisor as well. And I'm also currently looking for 2 PhD students. So if you are in the area of health communication and new media, we can talk and help you polish your proposal as well. So I think that's all I can share for today. Thank you so much for coming and thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, if you'd like to give that. Thank you for it. Any questions? Or maybe from the Zoom?
Maybe I have something to ask you.
Yeah, sure.
I believe you have so many experience in correspondence with the reviewers. Whether you are rejected or being accepted.
Right.
Actually, I once submitted my paper to one of international journal, but I'm only the but I was the co-author, not the first author.
Okay.
And they sent me the rejection letter.
So
I want what is your opinion about this? Maybe you can interpret
Sure.
the reason why they reject me. Says that after careful consideration, I regret to inform you that I must decline this submission on editorial grounds. And in the bracket, needs more academic rigor. What does it mean?
Okay, so there are different interpretations of academic rigor.
What is
First of all, is the research designed. Usually there is a problem with the research designs that they may think that it's not, again, when it's like a not good research design, it may lead to not good results. Second of all is the theoretical contribution. Like whether your paper have like enough theoretical frameworks to kind of like explain your study and have enough implications in terms of a theory.
Is it a common expression to reject?
It is, and it's a very convenient reason to reject.
It's a polite way.
It's a very polite way to say that academic rigor is very
But after that, to say that, and another,
Mhm.
after that, to say this paper may be a better fit for other journals. Or is it also the polite way?
Yeah, it means that they prefer, they don't receive the resubmission.
Oh,
So yeah,
okay.
kind of like,
Adore it.
yeah. So it's the polite way to say, please like go somewhere else.
Okay.
Yeah,
Don't say it
unfortunately.
again, yeah. Don't
Yeah.
say anymore, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Enough, yeah.
Yeah, but it can be interpreted as well that it means that it's just because of the fitness of the paper. So they don't think that it fits with the paper doesn't fit with the journals, so it's good. Usually some journals now will recommend the other names of the journals, but some will just like mention what it says, yeah. Yeah, sorry to hear that, but yeah, it's rejection is not a common thing in the process, right? So it's a good experience as well actually for us, you know?
Yeah.
Any other question? All right, if not, then thank you so much for coming in. Thank you so much once again for having me. I'm very pleased. I'm gonna stay for some time. If you would like to discuss percentage, I would like to do so. And I hope to see you again in the different journals. Thank you so much.
Bisa ya, gue jadi.
Ayo lanjutkan tuh. Apa langsung daftar dapat rekomendasi ya? Lagi rekomendasi. Iya. Iya, dia rekomendasi.
Gitu.
Tapi harus help. Harus help.
Kalau saya health, tapi
Nah.
saya bisa rekomendasi ke
Profesor.
kolega saya.
Balin apa? Balin apa?
Gimana?
Terima banyak ya Pak Roni. Let's see you again. Ya, good luck Pak Bekasnya.
Thank you, thank you.
Terima kasih.
Masih Paul ini kayaknya memang ininya di health ya, expertise maksudnya apa fokusnya itu di health.
Sebenarnya enggak juga sih. Kita ada beberapa area, cuman emang karena kita ada research center di health communication, dan sejujurnya health itu ini udah bisa
Atau
diperhatiin.
masih ya?
Masih. Sorry.
Kan
Namanya
namanya
atau di close aja.
iya close aja.